yeah, sometimes if there's resistance, I may just not be ready. But then I think if I don't do it now, it's just going to be a little bit harder next time it comes around because I'm not going to get away with it. Like, this is, you know what I mean? Like, this is to serve me somehow. And so I can kind of check in and see like, ooh, like Trisha today, do we want to go through this now, honey? And if I'm not ready, then it's like, okay, well, we're putting this on future Trisha to do that.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of Feel Good, the podcast. I'm your host. I'm your host, Malika Lee. And today my guest is Trisha Schaefer, and we are talking all about what I'm going to call in our conversation today, spiritual surrender. Welcome, Trisha.
Hello, thank you, Malika.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. So just to give you all a little bit of background about Trisha, before we get started, Trisha is an entrepreneur of a brick and mortar business that she runs and considers it her spiritual practice. She is also a graduate of the University of Santa Monica with a master's in spiritual psychology, and she lives down in San Diego with her pup. Okay, Trisha, we're going to jump right in. Are you ready?
All right, I'm so ready.
You ready to surrender to this conversation?
So yeah, when you texted, I was like, I'm just going to surrender the fear and resistance to what that means or what it could look like. And yes, I am definitely ready to jump in with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, and this is going to be perfect. Fear and resistance, these are definitely part of the surrender conversation. So let's, for frame of reference, generally, I think people have a negative connotation when they hear surrender, which is why I'm calling it spiritual surrender. But what does surrender mean to you?
Surrender to me means identifying that squiggly, wiggly feeling inside, that hesitation, that resistance, that I know that feeling. I'm doing the best to make up words to convey it, but there's this feeling inside that I recognize, and it's not one that I want to keep inside or listen to or believe or follow through with. And it's better that I do listen to it because it's safer. But I also know the betterness on the other side of not listening to it. And I've practiced so much listening to that squiggly, wiggly hesitation, resistance, whatever we want to call that ball of energy, that line of energy I feel inside. I've listened to it so much in the past that it's not fulfilling. It doesn't work for me. It might be initially okay, but from that initial acceptance or agreement on, it's discomfort. And so for surrender, for me, is willing to do the inverse version of that, having the initial discomfort, and then from then on is this magnificent beauty, growth. I don't know what's on the other side, but I now know that it's better than what I do know.
That's very interesting. I want to tease out a couple of the things that you said there. And it sounds like there's an inverse relationship. One is the choice. I think you're describing the squiggly and the resistance as not being that of surrender. And so there's making a choice that apparently on the surface or at first seems comfortable and then grows uncomfortable, versus surrender feels uncomfortable on the front end, but then grows more comfortable as time progresses. Is that accurate?
You totally got it. Yeah.
So I'm going to offer this definition I found on chopra.com. Chopra as in Deepak Chopra, I guess, Deepak Chopra. So it's chopra.com. And it says spiritual surrender is referred to as the joy of surrender in Vedic practices. It is the wonderful positive feeling you have when you simply let go. It's stepping out of all limitations, expanding beyond your usual conditioning, and opening to infinite possibilities. It's offering up the small self or personal identity to that of the absolute. So going back to what you said, Trisha, I'm wondering if you can give us an example of what you articulated and described in real life terms.
Yeah, an example was the invite to do this podcast, Malika.
Say more about that.
Well, yeah, it's this. So when there was this invite, I felt the constriction. I felt the hesitation, the discomfort, the uh, unknowingness, the insecurity. There's just so much unknown about it. And so being able to sit with that and observe it and look at it, just look at it and let it know that I see you. I know that you're there. And that just dissolves, and being willing to say, yes, I don't know what it looks like, but I sure as heck know I'm not going to say yes to that squiggly wiggliness I feel inside. Like that's not in alignment. It's not expansion. So saying yes to it and then seeing what shows up.
So did you wait for all of the discomfort to calm before you were able to say yes? Or did you still feel discomfort in the saying yes?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I want to be clear and present with it. So was I in discomfort when I said yes, or was I out of the discomfort and in acceptance when I said yes? I don't really know. It's all kind of so many different layers of energy flowing. I would say that the discomfort, um, the hesitation, or the resistance, um, instead of, I'm just teasing it out even now, trying to rewind and go back to those moments. So if I'm sensing this block that the resistance had, I don't know at the time, I didn't know what it was blocking, but I felt myself shifting that block into blocking the resistance, or into clogging that, to allow a yes to the possibility of the beauty and magnificence of connecting with you in this conversation.
Mm, mhm. How did you shift it? You mentioned that you paid attention to it. You didn't just try to like resist the resistance, that you listened and felt the resistance that came up. Is that all that it took to help shift it? Or did you do something else in addition to that?
I think it's been probably many things over many years, but I'm at a place now where I just in general have this agreement, this commitment with myself, this knowing of that line of energy, and it doesn't call the shots. So, to the best I can, in a moment, I try to recognize that and say, whatever this is pointing to that's really scary, I'm kind of actually going to go for it.
Mm, yeah, I really get that because, I'm thinking of times when I've had some really strong resistance. And I'll give an example. The way I was raised Baptist, and I had a very strong point of view about that
Mhm.
growing up. And and I wondered at some point, and there's nothing wrong with whatever religion, whatever speaks to your heart, whatever supports you in developing a relationship or that supports you in moving through life. Like it's not a one size fits all, in my humble opinion, but I was aware that it wasn't quite a fit for me growing up. And so I got to a place where I wondered if I even needed any kind of religion, anything, in order to develop a deeper relationship with God. And I started going to this church some years later, and it was feeding my soul. It was answering all these questions that I had. Shout out to Dr. Barbara Lewis King, who has made her transition now. She made her transition last year, but the church is called Hillside Chapel and Truth Center down in Atlanta. I was taking all these classes, and then this little voice said, go to the ministerial school.
Mhm.
And I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted no parts of that, because
Mm.
going back to my previous assessment, right? Like, I don't even know if I need religion necessarily to cultivate a relationship with God. So, this idea of going to a ministerial school was definitely outside of that container in
Mm.
my limited understanding. But when I tell you I finally did go, and sometimes the biggest rewards I have found in my life and the most enriching experiences have had a strong gatekeeper of resistance.
Yeah. That's a good word. The squiggly wiggly that I was trying to define, you just defined it, the gatekeeper. Mhm.
Mm, yeah. So that was one of my experiences of,
Mhm.
oh, pay attention when I feel this so strongly, because there's
Yeah.
going to be some nectar here that really feeds me. So what was your experience of not no longer letting kind of that gatekeeper keep you out of an experience or situation?
Mhm. Yeah. So another example is choosing to run a marathon. And the previous story was I am not a runner. My body is not built or made for running. It is so terribly miserable. It is not enjoyable. And living in San Diego, yeah, it's just not. It is not the thing how I would want to move my body. But living in San Diego, there's marathons like 3 a month. There's roadblocks. So not only is there, it's a visual thing I see all the time of these marathons actually happening all year long, Malika. You see people training for the marathon. And I was meeting a girlfriend somewhere, and we were deciding what do we want to do while we're, meeting in this mutually, we live far apart, so we found a place that's mutual. And what do we want to do while we're in this place that neither of us live in?
Mm.
And she kiddingly joked like, oh, hey, there's a marathon going on why don't we do it? And that was, like I had my story, right? Launched into the blah, blah, blah. No way. Like that just sounds terrible. That's not how I want to spend a vacation. But Malika, walking my dog through the streets, there's this really poignant moment of seeing this old, older man. And like he had like the jersey on and the number, like that paper number pinned to his little jersey. And he was shuffling and going slower than I was, just like strolling with my dog. But the look in his eye, Malika, he told himself he can do a marathon. And
Mm.
here I am telling myself I can't do a marathon, and I'm 30 something strong, amazing, healthy, filled with everything I could ever possibly need. But yet here I am telling myself I can't do a marathon. Part of me was like, nobody tells me I can't do something. And here was myself telling me, and here's him. And it was just that shift. He said he could do it. So he was practicing. And he didn't care what it looked like or what number he was going to finish, or I saw this powerful intention inside of him. And I said, yeah, like I want that for me. So playing with the idea of like, okay, so what's the game plan here? How do I healthily, safely, supportively train to do a marathon and, not hurt my body in the training of it or the actual doing of it? And it was a process of finding a running club and getting up, 2, 3 times a week for almost a year, at
Wow.
before sunrise, and eating as much as I could and hydrating and stretching and driving down to the meeting place and doing 8, 10, 12, 13, 16, 18 miles, whatever it was, running in the freezing cold and the pain and the I will use the hatred, because I hated every moment of it. I truly, truly did, Malika. I truly hated, but what got me through was this promise, this mantra of like, you never have to run again. You never have to run again. And this other surge of energies that showed up that was really supportive and got me through it was I just felt like I don't know what number age, but just picture like the oldest age I'll be in this lifetime. And her not being able to run, but dear God, her energy of living through me running when I have this body that I can still do it. It was so enlivening. It got me through like feeling her just living so vicariously and fully through me running through this time. And so, et cetera, the rest of that story. But that was a crucial example of the opportunity of surrendering a story I had been telling about myself, and the magnificence and the experience. Like that's a once in a lifetime, well, for me, once in a lifetime experience of doing a marathon. It was amazing.
And I heard you getting really moved as you started talking about connecting to that part of you that may get to a place that's too old physically, and unable to run anymore. What was that feeling? What were some of the gifts of choosing to surrender and run that marathon?
I really feel I can do anything now.
Mm.
Well, yeah, I can get to the place of doing anything now. Sometimes I still feel like I can't do things, but then I remember, girl, you did a marathon and you like did not, like, this is another one of those moments of you thinking you can't for whatever, fill in the blank. But like, not everyone can do a marathon. And the way it was so magnificent and majestic, it was beautiful. The whole experience was just glorious. And so I just hold that as an IntelliKey, as a key remembrance moment or experience, to use in the present moment if I ever feel that resistance that needs surrendering.
I hear you. That's really powerful. And the journey itself, so you experienced your unlimitlessness, right, by running a marathon and challenging your notion or story of not doing that or not being able to do that. Are there any other gifts that came? Did you meet a really cute guy, or were there any
Mm.
other surprises that happened
Mm.
on that journey as well?
I think the awareness of the strength and fortitude and perseverance, I learned qualities that had always been inherent in me, but I hadn't seen them before. And doing this experience, I it brought them forward. It brought them for me to see. Like I plan things out. Like I'm committed. Like I don't back down. I don't give up. I was so committed to doing it in a healthy, strong, safe way. Because
Mhm.
sometimes people overtrain and they get hurt right before it. Because that's when you're like running the most. You're at 20 something miles for each training leading up to the closest to. So it wasn't just the 26 miles of the marathon was the easy part. It was the
Mhm.
300 miles I had run previously to prepare for that actual event. So it was really the preparation of that magnificent event that really showed me the qualities of applying myself.
Mm.
It taught me support and teamwork, because like there's no way I could have done it on my own, zero. But going and having a group and being learning different techniques and skills from their experience, Malika, feeling every single one of their powerful reasons why they showed up to be there for the training too got me through it.
Mhm.
And when whenever, like, because I would stop running every single time if I could. But their encouragement, their upliftment um, kept me moving forward.
Wow. Wow. So having a powerful community or a tribe on that journey with you, it sounds like was essential to that process. And something that you said that really struck me. I did this workshop some time ago, and I did it multiple times. It was one of the most popular ones I did, and it was it's called Answering the Inner Call. And one of the things that I talk about in there is how fear is, it almost often goes hand in hand with doing something new. Like when there's a learning opportunity or a new experience, usually fear is one of our first responses. And that gatekeeper not only keeps an experience out, but what I was hearing from you, which is so powerful, is that in opening the gate, not only did it open the experience to you of running, but it also opened aspects of yourself to you, like seeing yourself bigger than you saw how you saw yourself before.
Yes, I didn't know what was on the other side of the gate, but I knew what was on this side of the gate. And now that I've, through this example of running the marathon, opened that gate and the magnificence and the glory that came through, um, each time there's that gatekeeper, I'm more quickly able to say yes and accept it.
Even though, yeah, even though there's discomfort there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful to point out, because in my mind, in the past, there were stories that people who did things like that weren't scared or weren't uncomfortable.
Mm,
And that only if once I felt more comfortable, right, in myself,
sure.
then I can do it. But that's not true.
Yeah, I've heard that before too, like where sometimes people they move into something because the discomfort that they're in is so unbearable that it pushes them towards something. You know,
Mhm.
they have to surrender that space that they're in because it's so uncomfortable. And I didn't find that to be my experience in this example. The whole entire process was, um, in a way, physically uncomfortable. But then runner high kicks in. That is a real thing. But it's not, it doesn't kick in early. So it's like, you know, 2/3 or 1/3 of the time is not that experience. And then it sure does kick in. And I think that's that example, that experience I found in other areas as well, where I chose to say yes.
So, Trisha, you shared some really powerful things about surrender. We've talked about resistance and the gatekeeper. For someone listening who may be struggling with some resistance right now, and I'll say that I am, for example, like what are some steps that you go through, or is there a surrender practice that kind of supports you through not allowing that resistance or that fear to stop you?
Yeah, sometimes if there's resistance, I may just not be ready. But then I think if I don't do it now, it's just going to be a little bit harder next time it comes around because I'm not going to get away with it. Like, this is, you know what I mean? Like, this is to serve me somehow. And so I can kind of check in and see, like, ooh, you know, like Trisha, today, do we want to go through this now, honey? And if I'm not ready, then it's like, okay, well, you know, we're putting this on future Trisha to do that. And, you know, sometimes she's like, yeah, I'll take, you know, future Trisha is like, yeah, I'll take one for the team. You guys aren't ready now. You know, I'll do the best I can in the future. And then, you know, sometimes I am cursing myself, like, why didn't I take care of it then? It would have been so much easier. But I also know that, you know, I couldn't at that time. And here I am now at a better place, but it's harder. So it's still kind of equivalent. So from that circle conversation inside myself of knowing and from experience, it's just like, can I just say yes? Can I just say yes now?
And that changes the context when you're saying, you know, it's either now or later, but it's no way that
Exactly.
you're gonna Neo and Matrix and dodge all those bullets,
Uh-huh.
or it won't come back again. So can you give an example of one of those times where you did say no, not now, and then how it
Oh,
came
yeah.
back and it sounded like it came back with not a vengeance, but
Mm.
even more complex?
Okay. I think one that's really a good example is paying off student loan debt. You know, I make way more money now than I did then. And so it made sense at the time for me to choose to not pay off as much as I could, not pay off those student loans, and kind of put it on to future Trisha. And yes, now I make more money than I did then. But guess what? All the interest accumulated. So it literally, that's a literal example of it's harder. It's kind of the equivalent. It was harder then, but it's still harder now in a way. Um, but I still would have had it be this way. I still would want to have given my past self that gift. And I feel more capable and competent to handle it now than I did then.
That's a really gracious way of looking at that. And I'm glad in some ways that you used student loans as an example, because that's so relatable to so many
Mhm.
people.
And Malika,
Um,
that's another example. I didn't want to bring that up. I didn't want to talk about that because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment associated with student loan debts and all the feelings that go with that burden.
mm,
And so, just in that silence, when I was thinking of when you asked the question, what's an example? I didn't want to share that. And I surrendered that because I felt that avoidance, that resistance, that hesitation. And I surrendered that and I accepted the vulnerability of being willing to share it.
wow. All that was going on over there for you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, I thank you for being willing to surrender that story, because you know, we may never know who hears this, that this will touch. And our experiences, I feel like sometimes aren't just for us alone, you know, and sometimes it takes courage to put ourselves out there in ways, or to surrender our stories, that they don't just belong to us.
Another tool that I refer to, I don't know if I'd call it a tool, but a inner conversation that moves me into surrendering is, Malika, I cast prayers. I cast, you know what I mean? I cast things out there. I pray, I ask for, I have heartfelt dreams and desires. And, I pray to whoever's listening out there. And I know to watch for what is presented to me. In some time in the future, something, my prayers will be answered, but it never looks the way that I think it's supposed to look. So I've learned that when something presents itself, it's like, how is this an answer to a prayer that I've cast? It doesn't, and I don't know until I say yes to it and move forward with it. And then after going through that experience, I can see, like, oh my gosh, how this was an answer to such and such prayer from whenever. I never would have guessed that or known that had I just dismissed it as, no, yeah, I don't want, like, no, yeah, that doesn't sound good. But I've just learned through multiple experiences of that to now be in a place of openness and curiosity and being like, how is this? How might this be an answer to a prayer somewhere, somehow? And I don't know until I surrender that resistance and move into it,
So how do you know to say yes to it?
because I just do say yes to it because of that squiggly wiggliness inside. There's a
Mm,
specific signature. That um, I've just, through my experience, so from having, let's say I have like 10, 15 experiences of something that I was scared to say yes to, but I did anyways. If I go back and identify what was that precursor, that feeling right before I said yes, and then launched into the magnificence that I didn't know would happen at the time, I've just reoccurred that energetic signature enough times now to where I'm familiar with it. And when
mhm.
it shows up, I can more easily and more be more willing to say yes to it.
I really hear you about the experience and having, kind of like you said, that signature or touchstone, excuse me, to it. It takes so much humility
Mhm.
to surrender, and courage and strength, like all in one.
Mhm.
So it's really spiritually juicy. What would you like to share that I haven't asked you already about surrender?
Mm. Mm. There's this one quote that really stands out for me, what I've been trying to put my finger on in describing what it feels like inside. And this is a Chinese proverb, and it says, tension is what we think we should be. Relaxation is who we are.
Mm,
Tension is who we think we should be. Relaxation is who we are. And how that relates to surrendering is when I was describing that that gatekeeper, that squiggly wiggly, like that energetic pattern, that signature that I'm familiar with. You know, this proverb is using the word tension, and the relaxation is the surrendering into who I am, into just this present moment.
Yeah, surrender. It's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that quote, because what's coming from this conversation is one that I did not anticipate. Generally, when I think about surrender, I don't even think about it being surrendering to my true nature. I think of like surrendering to listening to my intuition, for example. So
Mhm.
it's more of an outer, like, how do I navigate this new experience situation versus a how do I surrender to an acceptance and a deepening of who I really am and being okay
Mm.
with that.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm hearing you say now. It's like this practice of surrender is really coming into a deeper and deeper surrender to your authentic self
Mhm.
and who you are.
Mhm. And receiving the spiritual, this spiritual energy that's wanting to. So yes, what you're describing, I experience is accurate. On the one hand, it's the surrendering to allow my authentic self to come forward, as well as there's a surrendering to allow this spiritual energy or God or whatever those forces are, that force is outside, come into me. So it's
Mhm.
both, it's a flow of both ways that there's an opportunity to surrender to.
So, we're wrapping up here, but there's something that came into my consciousness just now that kind of ties it together for me, at least in my frame of reference and study, and that is um, A Course in Miracles has been a cornerstone in my spiritual journey for quite some time, and its theory or approach is that at all times we're only choosing between two things: fear and separation, which they categorize or label as the voice of the ego,
Mm.
and the voice of love, which is about oneness. And they characterize that in, they use Christian terminology, but different meanings, and they call that the Holy Spirit. And so, what's so interesting though, is that in surrendering and what we're talking about now, and how you referenced the ego before, um, and then the difference of like surrendering not only to that inner presence, but also to like that outer presence of love or God or universe or whatever benevolent presence that you want to call it. But that is like our true essence,
Mhm.
is that
Mhm.
love and is of the spirit. And so I just got like this epiphany of, wow, that's true, on so many different levels, of like that choosing love is choosing the love within ourselves. It's choosing the love as far as recognizing and remembering who we truly are as children of love.
Mm.
um, Wow, that's really interesting. And also because separation also means limitation. And so even in choosing that divine presence of love and recognizing our inner divinity, it's almost connecting to a limitlessness
Mm.
potential
Mhm.
that we have versus the ego, which is like more
Mm.
constricted, right? And limiting of how it
Limited
can
and
show up.
finite. Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Mm. Mm.
So it's like really kind of like surrendering to authentic power.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah.
Woo!
Hmm.
So Trisha, as we bring this conversation to a close, is there anything that you would like to summarize? I know I already gave you an opportunity and you shared a really poignant quote, but what comes up for you now as we wrap up this conversation? And again, I want to acknowledge you for surrendering to the invitation and showing up and being very vulnerable and authentic with having to surrender all along this journey and conversation. But what's present for you now?
What's present is to thank you for following your intuition and inspiration and extending the invite, because it's been an answered prayers. You don't know what prayers I've put out there but you did hear your intuition. And for you to follow that, you unknowingly answered someone else's prayer. So I'm very grateful that you followed that and that we were able to have this time together. I'm grateful that I said yes to it and got to experience this.
Hmm. Yes, well, we definitely, are all connected, and this is just one of those touchstones, reminding us of that. When you said about it being answered prayer, and me having no idea, right?
Mhm,
But when I align and listen to the voice of love, that presence knows.
mhm,
So thank you for that. And I would just like to close with, I found online there were these 3 steps to spiritual surrender. And so, as a charge, I'm not even going to put this out to anybody else, right? But just even to me, to anchor this conversation in. Um, it says one, in the source, I'll give you the source at the end, but it says there's 3 steps. One, ask how you can be of service to the Holy Spirit or to love, or, like I said, fill in the gap with whatever resonates with you, God, mother, father. But number 1, ask how you can be of service and be in cooperation. 2, ask for feedback and specifically for signs. So am I making the right choice? Is this in alignment? And ask for clarity in which way to go. And I think Trisha exemplified that by saying her inner sign is that inner feeling that she has of that tension when the gatekeeper shows up. And then number 3, act out of love rather than fear. So these are 3 steps that are offered in living from a place of spiritual surrender. And this is from medium.com website. And so I ask, if you have heard something today that inspired you, I ask that you share it, and that you surrender to whatever is up for you. We'd love to hear about that. And I think it would be great feedback for both of us, how this conversation has spoken life into maybe a situation or something that you have been struggling or dealing with, you that are listening right now. So please comment, share, subscribe. And with that, I will surrender our time together and say thank you so much, Trisha, again, for accepting this invitation. You can find, and you can find Trisha's company, Liquid Eden, on Instagram at Liquid Eden, or the website is www.liquid-eden.com. All right, signing off for now. Please continue to be good to yourself and good to each other, and keep feeling good.